Greetings, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Chaucer's Books virtual author discussion with Natalie Hodges, the author of Uncommon Measure, A Journey Through Music Performance and the Science of Time. My name is Michael Takeuchi. I'm the events coordinator at Chaucer's Books, a 47-year-old bookstore, independent bookstore located in Santa Barbara, California. To purchase tonight's book or browse other titles, please check out our website at chaucersbooks.com. While our guests and I are the only ones seen and heard on this webinar, please feel free to utilize the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen. Tonight's event is also being simulcasted on and recorded for our YouTube channel, and it will be available to view after program's completion. If you're on YouTube, like many of you are, please type your questions in the chat and we hope to get to it. So let's begin. I just have to. Okay. Tonight we welcome Natalie Hodges, the author of Uncommon Measure, A Journey Through Music Performance and the Science of Time. Natalie has performed as a classical violinist throughout Colorado and in New York, Boston, Paris, and the Italian Piedmont, as well as the Aspen Music Festival and the Stowe Tango Music Festival. She graduated from Harvard University, where she studied English and music and lives in Denver, Colorado. Uncommon Measure is her first book. Welcome, Natalie.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to Chaucer's, and thank you everybody for tuning in and being here tonight.
Well, the pleasure's ours. And having this conversation with you, we have a very special guest in Michael Pollan. He's the author of 9 books, including How to Change Your Mind, Cooked, Food Rules, In Defense of Food, The Omnivore's Dilemma, The Botany of Desire, and most recently, 2021's This Is Your Mind on Plants, which will be out paperback later this year. All of these were New York Times bestseller. He's also the author of the audiobook Caffeine, How Coffee and Tea Created the Modern World. He's a longtime contributor to the New York Times Magazine, and he teaches writing at Harvard University and the University of California, Berkeley. In 2010, Time Magazine named Michael one of the 100 most influential people in the world. So please welcome Michael Pollan.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be here.
Hi.
Great to be here with you, Natalie.
You too.
I'm honored that you're here, Michael, and you do have a connection with our author tonight. If you can explain a little bit about how you know Natalie over the years.
Yeah, well, I'm very proud to be here because Natalie was my student. And we met what were you? Were you a sophomore?
I was a junior.
You were a junior
fall.
when you took that class. In 2017, I came to Harvard to teach, and one of my classes was a class called The Eyes Habit, The Art of the Personal Essay. And Natalie was in that class and pretty quickly distinguished herself as a beautiful memoirist. She wrote a couple pieces for me that were, jumped out for a couple of reasons. One was they were beautifully written, as I said, but they had a kind of fierceness to them that belied her her mild manner exterior, and really made an impression. But I have to say something, when a writer finds the right subject. She was writing these wonderful memoirs about her family and the immigrant experience. Her mother is Korean, father's American, and the clash of cultures and all these kind of things. But it was really when she hit on the subject of music and various scientific ideas connected to music that, I don't know, I just remember when I found my subject early on, plants in the garden, that there's just a little extra spark. And Natalie was very fortunate in that she found that spark much earlier in life than I did. Wow. And the result is this book, which is just rich beyond measure. It has so much in it. It is not only a story about music, it's a story about growing up. It is an exploration of ideas of time and neuroscience and entrainment and how we communicate with one another. I mean, there's just so much to it that it's just a delight to read. I was rereading it today and was just blown away. So anyway, it's an honor for me to be able to introduce the patrons of Chaucer's and anyone else who is watching to a writer I regard as really gifted, and here we are at the beginning of a long and great career, I'm sure.
That's great. Before I turn it over to you both, I'll have to ask Natalie what was Michael like as a teacher?
Is it my turn to embarrass him?
Yes.
Now that I've suitably
I have to
embarrassed
give you the last word.
Well, I have to say I had never I can't think of another professor or teacher who sees his students with so much generosity and also clarity at the same time. Like Michael, when you're going around the table in workshop and your piece is being edited, and it's horrifying because everyone is about to rip you into shreds. Michael just looks at you, and there's this kindness and this twinkle in his eye, and at the same time he's offering you the most this razor sharp editorial feedback that is the best that you could hope to have, the best in the world. Wow. But there's such a way of seeing each student, and he approaches every person differently because he sees them and notices them so deeply. And I think from reading a couple of pieces can really anticipate the way that he'll need to give feedback or what they'll be most responsive to. And that's such a gift as a student, and also just such a gift when you're starting out as a writer and trying to find that, what Michael, you said, is that spark and that subject. There's such a generous attention to who each student is. And I mean, to get your pieces line edited with, I don't know, to get your pieces line edited by Michael Pollan is something else, because he's so thorough and detailed and generous in his feedback. So I have appreciated him always. And I'm so lucky really to have been his student and mentee. So.
All right, now I'm suitably embarrassed.
Okay. Mission accomplished.
All right, why don't you two take this away now?
Great. Thank you, Michael.
Yes, thank you, Michael.
So, Natalie, I think we need to back up a little and tell people who don't know a little bit about what this book is about and how it originated. You started playing violin at 5. You were on a course that, was supposed to end with you as a professional concert soloist, but something happened along the way.
Yes, something did happen. I was on a course that had a very specific endpoint, as you said, and it also had very well outlined pre-programmed steps. Like I knew I knew for how long to practice every single day, when to practice. I knew where I needed to be, every 5 years, which graduate programs I should be applying to, all of those things. But toward the latter end of that career, I guess my maybe freshman, sophomore years of college, I started getting these bouts of crippling performance anxiety. I would go on stage and I would feel like I could not play. That's a lot of people have that experience. But when I was very conscious when those sort of attacks happened, of feeling like time had stopped. I couldn't get into the flow of the music's temporality. If we think about music as being consisting of all these repeated temporal structures, essentially, like we can have the recurrence of a physical beat, but also the repetition of certain chords within a phrase, certain chords within a chord progression, certain chord progressions within a phrase structure, you know, in a rock song, you'd have verses and choruses alternating, that kind of thing. I would just feel like I couldn't lock into those patterns in the anticipatory way that is required if you're going to just feel yourself in the music's time. And that's also what's required to, you know, be able to be expressive and mold the performance interpretively how you want. And I felt like I was just dragged out of time in that way. And that was horrifying. It was terrible to experience on stage, but also terrible to have that experience and have it disrupt that whole pattern that my life had taken up to that point, with all the plans that I had to be a concert violinist. And so what
did it lead to mistakes, or did it lead to just substandard play?
Oh, all of the above. Yeah, it's just anything you can imagine. And the passage that I'll read at some point, it will be very clear the kind of things that would happen to me in performances. Lots of times I would, you know, there'd be a part that was really difficult and in practice, and I'd be able to get it, but then I would almost feel in this psychosomatic way, if you will, that it would be like my brain would sort of tell me, you're going to mess that part up in the performance. And I, of course, would. Once you think that, that's going to happen. So yeah, it made me feel like I couldn't be as expressive even when things were going okay. I couldn't just be with the music emotionally, and it also led to mistakes as well.
And do you have an understanding of the psychology behind this? I mean, did you try to figure it out?
Yes, and that's actually what the book came out of. I wanted to understand why my time perception was just off when I was nervous, and what the connection between those two things might be. And I remembered the work of a neuroscientist, an evolutionary biologist, and music researcher who is at Tufts and between Tufts and Harvard, Dr. Anirudh Patel.
Yeah.
You know him. And I had my sophomore year, I had taken a general education class on evolution, and for our final project, we do whatever we wanted. And so I had researched the evolution of musical capability in humans. And I had come across Dr. Patel's work and his theory behind basically why we have such a seeming a trait, the ability to make music when that's so seemingly superfluous to our survival.
Is it universal? I mean, is
yes. If
cultures have?
Absolutely. All cultures have some form of music. And if we put a metronome in front of any person, even a young child, even one who has no musical training, they would instantly be able to lock onto a beat and sync their motions with a beat. And that's something that very, very few animals on planet Earth can do. Like even chimpanzees cannot do that easily. And so Dr. Patel looked at this, specifically this ability to sync our bodily movements with a beat. And he found that not only does our auditory perception like allow us to, you know, coordinate our movements in response to a beat, but the fact that we can coordinate our movements to respond to a beat, and the activity that occurs in the motor cortex actually shapes our beat perception. And so basically musical capability evolved out of this, our ability to synchronize how we move. Because if I can synchronize the way I'm moving with an external beat, and you can do the same, like we can synchronize our movements together, and then we're going to be much more successful at hunting and gathering and fighting other groups, you know, in early in our evolution.
So it's a social instinct fundamentally.
Yes. And he also believes, Dr. Patel also believes that it evolved like this connection between the auditory regions of the brain and the motor regions of the brain, because it facilitated vocal learning and, you know, our ability to coordinate the muscles that allow us to speak with what we're hearing and to be able to respond and express ourselves that way. So if beat perception is really at the core of understanding music as time. And it turns out, this is what I came across in my research as I was searching for answers as to why this happened to me, is that when you're nervous, the neurochemical activity that is the result of anxiety affects the motor cortex, which plays a part in syncing to the beat, or what the technical term is entrainment. And so if you are nervous, you're not going to be able to actually demarcate time as effectively and as fluidly as you could if you aren't thinking about it. So that is kind of the psychology behind that phenomenon of feeling like time stops. Because if the temporal fluency of your performance is lost, right, it's not just going to be the physical beat, but it's going to be your ability to make sense of a piece as this entity in time and to move through it from beginning to end. So that's kind of behind it. And from there, that's kind of when I realized, oh, there's so much here. There perhaps is a way to ground this very subjective individual experience I had as a performer in the scientific and the concrete. And then, it can be shared that way then too.
So, I mean, you're not the first person to suffer performance anxiety. Many people do.
Not original.
There is this phenomenon of thinking too much and losing your fluency, right? In sports also this happens, right?
Yes,
there's
absolutely.
certain things where we have to kind of trust our bodies and our minds to produce, and it's remarkable what it can do without our thinking deliberately. Did you come across strategies to deal with it, that were helpful?
Yes, I absolutely did. For me, it never went away completely. I guess I'll speak to the personal strategy I used, and then some additional research that I came across about what you were saying about sort of letting the body take over the mind. As just for me as a performer, I found that if I could focus on somebody in the audience, even if I couldn't really see their face, even if they were just sort of a shape a dark shape in the auditorium, and if I could really play toward them, it was this way of taking me out of my own self-consciousness, and in that way, that would sort of slip me back into the music's time, which is, if you think about it, the time that during a performance is being shared. Because we all experience time so subjectively, but if you and I are both listening to the same piece, we're feeling time be demarcated in that same way for 3 minutes, 15 minutes. So if I could really focus on somebody else and just feel like I was like, okay, I'm going to play for them. If I mess up, it's okay. I'm still playing for them, and sort of try to offer the performance a bit more in that way. That helped my temporal perception kind of walk back in place. The interesting research that I think really backs up what you said just now about that body-mind relationship is there's been research on the brains of improvising musicians. It's becoming more and more, neuroscientists are turning their attention to it more and more, and they've found that there's this decrease in functional connectivity between this area that you've spoken about in your book on drugs, the default mode network. And it's not a region of the brain itself, but it's this network of connectivity between lots of different regions of the brain that basically modulate our sense of self and our ego, and also our conscious memory and our ability to plan for the future. So past, present, and future. And when people who are really gifted improvisers improvise, that functional connectivity dies down. Those regions of the brain don't talk to each other as much. And so that really bears out what a lot of these improvisers are saying, like, I don't think about the past or the future, I just lose myself in the present, or I get out of the way and I'm able to just improvise. And at the same time, there's also, they've done like motivic analysis of the music that the performers produced, like while they were in the fMRI scanner. And it's, as much as they've gotten out of the way and are not thinking about the past or planning ahead, the music is very coherent and they're drawing on things that they've played in the past. And it's really this idea that this different kind of deeper muscle memory comes to the fore. And the researchers have described it as embodied creativity or embodied cognition, that your body just kind of takes over. That's quite a long answer, but
yeah, no, it's a great answer. I mean, we share this interest in the default mode network, and
yes.
Which I read about, because when they took brain scans of people on psychedelics, both
Right.
psilocybin and LSD, they were surprised to find this deactivation. They sort of expected to find lots of fireworks going on in the brain,
Right.
but it was this area where the self and self-awareness seems to be involved, goes away. I mean, it gets muffled, and it's also true in experienced meditators. And in all three cases, I think the ego is dissolving to some extent, and that allows other things to take place. Because, you know, as we know, our ego gets in our way. We trip over it all the time, and excessive self-consciousness is the worst recipe for doing things fluidly.
Right.
So anyway, so you didn't consider taking some drugs?
Not at this time, no. I'll get back to you.
So I would love you to read a passage that addresses some of these questions about performance anxiety.
Absolutely. The passage that I would like to read is from the first chapter of the book, and it's what I hope is that it gives a sense of really how crippling the anxiety was, how it was almost like the way your consciousness kind of splits at the moment that you realize you're anxious. And it also contains a lot of the questions that catalyze the writing of the book. So
great.
All right, here we go. The performance was going well, almost unbelievably well, in fact. I'd practiced counting down each time the theme returned as a way of getting through the piece, of keeping track and also keeping up morale. Only 3 more repetitions of the theme till the end. Now 2, now 1. Yet something strange started to happen as I counted those returns down. I felt, and this is the only way I know how to describe it, that I was inside the music's time, in the heart of a tolling grandfather clock whose gears turned at an allegretto grazioso rate of 6/8 notes to a bar. The bell tolled on the hour of the theme, but the time in between was itself whirring and unfolding, development by development, variation by variation. Ticking off the theme's returns, I felt at the same time how each section engendered the next, how they progressed into and referred back to and complicated one another, and how, in always circling back to the theme, they shaped a globe of time, a sphere of sound. Each variation's passage changed the feeling of the theme that followed it, inflecting it with a memory of all that came before, so that even as each theme relocated itself in the present, it echoed with the ghostly chimes of the past. Then I remembered that I was supposed to mess up. Time, which had been bubbling steadily along, froze. My hand seized up. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion, yet too fast for me to catch up. My left hand wouldn't shift smoothly up the fingerboard, which was unfortunate because the chromatic and arpeggiated runs accelerate from the original tempo and require, by the final measure, about 3 shifts per bar. My right hand, meanwhile, decided it was no longer capable of holding the bow, causing my bow hold to collapse and my fingers to lock, white-knuckled, just to keep from dropping the bow entirely. But then it happened. Just before the last chord, I dropped the bow. I was forced to play the chord by plucking the strings in what was perhaps the world's unluckiest and most spontaneous demonstration of pizzicato. It's almost comical now, but whenever I think back and try to analyze what happened, I am still stricken by the memory, sick and visceral, of how it felt when time stopped. Why is it that one sense of time, so supple inside the music itself, seizes up and cracks beneath an audience's expectant gaze, or as soon as one becomes aware of that gaze, that expectation? Why does getting into the flow of the music require yielding yourself to its time, feeling its flow through and around you, when all the while time is also the enemy, the thing you're running out of as you play along, trying to make it to the end, and yet trying to make something of the moment while the music lasts? If you can't get into that flow, if your nerves get the best of you and you're dragged onto the shore of self-consciousness, well, chances are you'll mess up that tricky run, or play the last chord as an anticlimactic pizzicato and hurry off the stage with your head bowed. In performances like my botched Paganini, even when you've been dreading all the while that something will go awry, you're never prepared for it. The flow is staunched, the fabric rent. You feel punched in the gut, knocked out of the music's time and back into your own. And then afterward, you can feel the seconds and minutes passing. You trudge through, it's all linear. You just want it to be over. You just want to make it to the end.
Ooh, beautiful passage. I love that phrase. You're dragged onto the shore of self-consciousness.
Oh, thank you.
Because the image, of course, is swimming freely with, complete freedom of movement, and then the friction of hitting the shore.
You're beached and then you die. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're a whale.
If you're a whale, yes.
So I'm kind of curious, when you made a decision to get off the track you were on,
yes,
your mother had invested a huge amount in you and your siblings and was really committed to your music education and your music career. How did she react? And what was it like to tell her?
She reacted with the most, it was really just a humbling kind of love to receive from her. This is something that I talk a lot about in the book. My mother is Korean, and there is this stereotype of Asian kids who play classical music and become really good at it because it's this form of assimilating yourself into Western culture, right? Because if you can become the best at, the high art of the culture that you so much want to be part of, then maybe you've made it. But that tiger mother stereotype, which many of the people listening may know, originated with Amy Chua's book, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. It's the paradox of it is the more you try to assimilate, the more you mark yourself out as an outsider, right? Because if you're really in it, you wouldn't have to make sure that you're the best. My mother has a friend who another Korean friend who said, we have to be twice as good to be considered half as much. But there's this stereotype of this mom who taskmasters her kids and forces them to practice. And my mom never did that. It wasn't this punishment driven, oh, you practice or else, or even a kind of guilting, like I've invested so much in you, make something of it. It was never like that. And the really difficult thing was that because of our race and because she's Korean, people assumed it was. And it's so hard. Like, how can you explain, like, no, I practice, so much every day, but it's not the stereotype, right? But I've talked with my mom a lot about it. I talked with her when I was sort of in the process of quitting, and we still speak a lot about this. And I so value that we can, is that she wanted us to play, my siblings and I, to play classical music for two reasons. Because she loved it. She loved classical music and she knew its beauty, and she wanted us to have that exposure to it. And I think she really, she had played when she was younger too. And so she understood what it just can mean in your life. And I think she also wanted us to have the feeling of being good at something and the empowerment that comes from that. And so that was always so difficult to explain to people. But I wasn't ever, because of the love that her investment in our music, because at one point all of us also told her we wanted to go for this too. And that was when she was like, we're gonna, we'll give everything we've got, because you've said you want to. Because of the love that came out of, I didn't feel scared to tell her. I remember asking her one night, I was playing a passage for her, and I sort of said, Mom, when you were quitting, how did you know? And I think when I said that to her, she knew that probably I was gonna start moving away. But she said, I still remember, she said, you just know when the time comes, and the important thing is that you choose. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, well, so that was her giving you the license to do what you needed to do.
Yeah, I think if we go back to that idea of empowerment, like there's the power of knowing that you know how to work hard at something, knowing that you have something that you're good at, and something to offer to the world and to other people. There also, also that comes with that is the power to say, I've given it my all and I can walk away, and make that choice for myself. So there's such a huge life lesson in that. I'm really grateful to her.
Yeah, she sounds like an extraordinary woman. I regret I didn't make it to your graduation, because I would have had a chance to meet her.
One day, I know she would love to meet you too. She's the coolest person I know.
I believe it. I believe it. It's kind of remarkable, though, that having given that up, you managed to very quickly distinguish yourself in another art form, which we're in the process of celebrating tonight, and that you achieved, incredible amount very quickly, once you started writing. I mean, a lot of the pieces that make up this book, and it's very much a whole, even though it is made of essayistic pieces. I mean, to me, it's a really, this is what the personal essay in the hands of an American can be, which is to say, more than a memoir, something that brings many different aspects of human experience together and weaves them in a, each of the chapters has a kind of foreground narrative that is very compelling, and we want to know what's going to happen and what happens when you drop the bow, and or what happens in your family at a certain point. But then it's punctuated by these, to me, these wondrous digressions into the most unexpected places.
Thank you.
One of them is quantum physics. And people might wonder well, let me say one thing first.
Sure.
I don't want to make this book sound like it is so recondite or so specialized. It's an incredibly accessible book. I really don't know much about music, and you use terms from music, as you did in that passage you read, but even if you don't know what they mean, in the context, you get it. And so it really is a book that, even for people who aren't particularly interested in music, but are just interested in humans, the human experience. But I'm kind of curious how you ended up, what brought you, what kind of questions drove this exploration of quantum physics, which I know from my own writing is one of the hardest subjects to approach in a way that is comprehensible. I mean, even physicists don't understand quantum physics that well.
Yeah, thank goodness, right? Trying to write about it was a little tricky. Yeah, sure. There's a couple different things or paths that led me to that. Across the chapters, the sort of the arc of the book is from this sort of rigid or more rigid way of being and thinking that really prizes memorization and a certain kind of preparation that doesn't permit deviation from what you've done in the past. I got it perfect on Thursday, so why can't I do it the exact same way on Saturday? It's a movement from that toward the freedom of, or the relative freedom, because improvisation is not really completely free, but toward being accepting that improvisation is just that, and no matter what, whenever you play, there are going to be elements that you can't control or prepare for, and that you should embrace that. That's the only way to kind of get out of your own head. So I was moving towards that, and I knew that I wanted to conclude the book with an essay about tango music, because I have always loved tango music, and it's when I was in high school, my quartet and I would play it a lot, and we sounded good when we played it, and everyone enjoyed it. It felt free. The audience would always respond the most strongly to when we played tangos. And I've never had an experience playing tango violin where time would stop. So it was always special to me. And so I wanted to write about it. And I eventually realized, to my horror, that to write credibly about it, I would have to learn how to dance it. So I started taking these tango dance classes under the guise of reportage for my thesis. And it was amazing to me that the first thing I learned was that tango partners improvise together. I'd always assumed that it was a set kind of choreography of like a pattern of steps that is just sort of repeated over and over again. But it's two people who literally, they feed off of one another and anticipate one another, and they're able to be so in sync because of that. And it's not just really, storied professional dancers who can do that. Like you can just go to a tango class and learn how to feel this with your partner. So that was quite amazing to me. And it reminded me just of one concept that I knew sort of knew about in a cursory way in quantum physics, where it called entanglement, where if we have two particles that are entangled, and what entanglement means, it's hard to explain. I don't think the full extent of all of its implications are understood, but we know we can have two particles that share some entangled connection with each other. And no matter how far apart they are in the universe, if one particle, if we flip its polarity, which is the direction, vertical or horizontal, in which its electrical field is vibrating, the other particle will instantly flip its own in the same direction, as though it, the only way to describe it is as though it knew. And I would watch my classmates dancing and our instructors dancing together, and it would be as though, one person would move and in a good moment in the dance, right? The other person moves with them as though that were planned, even though it's completely spontaneous. And one of my dance instructors in that class, she would use this term that because all of us would be dumbfounded watching the two partners in sync. And she said, she's like, I know you want to know how I know what my partner is going to do. And she says, I follow the GPS. And what she called the GPS was just like this area right here on their chest. And it kind of just, in focusing on that, she's like, you can just tell what they're going to do. And so it was this idea of like literal coincidence, moving together, somehow being able to anticipate and sort of sync then the way that we're experiencing time, the way we're experiencing the music and moving through it in time. That was so powerful. And so the idea in that chapter is to use the physics really as a metaphor to explain this amazing synchronicity that can happen between two human beings, and this amazing way of sharing time. The other sort of thing that drew me to the idea of entanglement was that word coincidence is what we use for the syncing of the particles, but we also just have the word coincidence. Like sometimes things just line up. And I felt extremely fortunate when I was writing that there were a lot of different coincidences that fell into place so that I could write the book. For example, I had studied Dr. Patel's research on entrainment when I was a sophomore. And then I still remember there was one day early senior year when I was working on the thesis, you emailed me and you said, oh, you should get in touch with this guy. I just met him, this really fascinating scientist. It was Dr. Patel. And another coincidence was the teacher of the tango class. I didn't know that he taught tango, but I had met him before when another professor at Harvard, Mark Schell, I had been telling him about my struggles with music. I wasn't sure if I was going to abandon it. And he said, oh, you should talk to my advisee, Thomas. He is a musician too, and also a writer, and he studies comparative literature. He can help you. So I had met him a couple years before, and then he turned out to be the teacher when I walked into tango class. So there were just a lot of things like that. There are others that felt, it's just random chance, right? But you want to feel like it's not. And that gave me the encouragement to keep going, and also to keep seeking connections between different realms of scholarship, between different people and their expertises. So yeah.
I think that's part of the process. When you're writing nonfiction, and it's probably true when you're writing fiction too, that the right person, the right book, just shows up. And I think part of it is that you have an openness or a stickiness, and so you're alert to those possibilities. That sort of coincidence happens all the time when I'm doing research. So
it's pretty magical feeling. Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of entrainment, and that's what you were describing, right? When you were talking about tango, that's a kind of entrainment.
That, yes, it's going to be our ability to sync that with each other, to feel entangled, as it were, is going to be rooted in entrainment. We have this shared biological mechanism that allows us to entrain to beats. And so if I'm fundamentally to be able to craft a dance and improvise a dance with someone else, we have to be feeling time in the same way.
Yeah.
So,
it's such a beautiful idea. I mean, it just seems to apply to a lot in life.
I think so. It's reminding myself of that helps me outside of music as well.
Yeah. Oh, I'll bet. So we have some questions that have accumulated, and it is the time we're supposed to turn to them. I don't know if Michael is going to come back on to choose them, or should we? I can open up. I've got the Q&A open.
It's up to you. Would you like to do it, Michael, or?
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay.
Cool. Okay.
Why is everybody named Joe?
Yeah.
Hello, Joe. Okay, we sort of answered the Tiger Mom question.
Yes. And I guess to further that answer is like the idea of that essay in this book, because the question is, what was it like to have a tiger mom? And I didn't. That's like that reductive stereotype.
Right. Why is it different to perform in front of an audience rather than performing without an audience?
Oh, interesting question.
Yeah.
I guess I wouldn't have thought of. I guess this would be just like when you're practicing, maybe this idea that you're performing for yourself or performing for a teacher. Performing for an audience is scarier, I think, for sure. That makes sense. Yeah, I think at least for me, when I'm playing with a lot of people there, I become very conscious of like, I've got one shot to get it right. It can't be recreated. But I would say that performing for an audience does within the scariness of that is contained the possibility that you can pick somebody out, or you can pick out multiple people and feel like you're sharing it with them. And I think also the element of risk that is involved there is quite special and can be harnessed to your advantage. And there's nothing more. There are a few things more vulnerable than that. And if you can accept that for yourself, I think.
So there is the adrenaline high of, you have to bring more to something when there's a crowd. And that I'm always struck by what you can do with that energy, with that adrenaline in front of, and you don't get that when you're just in front of one or two people.
Right, absolutely. You kind of become somebody else in a way. I don't know if you feel that.
Yeah, but I also feel like mentally, I can function better. Like my memory works better when I'm in front of a crowd, and I'm always shocked that I'll go out really unprepared, and that I'll be able to find exactly what I need. And if it's a big enough crowd and I'm frightened enough, I will.
Yeah, so, you kind of just got to get stuck with the hot poker,
It's a push you out on stage. Yeah. Okay, this goes to the evolution question. Aaron wants to know, when did our ancestors start to play music? I wonder if we know. Is this due to some new brain region being evolved?
That's such a great question. I don't actually know. I don't know that I could put a date on sort of anthropologically. That is something that I would need to find out on when we started to play music. It probably is going to vary too across regions.
I don't know what the evidence would be. I mean, obviously we have evidence when we started painting. We have cave paintings, but what would be the equivalent in music?
I think that's probably why it's
instruments.
Difficult to. I guess so, but I mean, then that goes to this very interesting question of what qualifies as music. If I have a stick and a rock and I'm tapping a stick on a rock, we're not going to necessarily know if that's evidence of an instrument. Or probably, I bet that the first instances of it were people clapping, like doing body percussion and singing. So that's going to be quite hard to quantify. But I do. The second part of the question about a new brain region evolving. Again, that very streamlined connection between the auditory cortex and the motor cortex, and the fact that it goes both ways, that is going to be what allowed us, if we think of, if to be music, it has to be organized temporal events that are auditory. We're going to have some kind of pattern. And that's what's that brain connection is what's going to have allowed us to do that.
This is an interesting question. In your writing, were you able to hit the equivalent of improvisation?
Oh, I love this question. Yes, I hope so. I think I got closer to that, what I believe is that feeling, than I ever had playing music. So when I was transitioning away from music and into writing, with the process of working on the thesis and then afterward, I loved it. So I loved sitting down at my computer to write, because I love the idea that I would have written something yesterday, gotten it pretty good, then open up my Word doc. It was there today. That never happens to me with music. Every day was a new day. I was like, oh.
You saved.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, oh, it's still there. So for a while, I felt that they were so opposite. And I loved that with the writing, it was fixed, it was certain. The past there was evidence of the past there, and I could tinker with it and fix it as much as I wanted. But I think now that I'm further out in time, not only from music or playing in the same way that I did, but also from writing the book, I do feel that there is a tremendous connection between at least what I've read about improvisation and how I understood it from the improvisers and also the neuroscientists I talked to, and writing, because when you sit, at least for me, like when it's going well, if I sit down to write, I'm not burdened by self-consciousness of like how I'm trying to say it. There's just an idea that I want to connect to, and because you don't sit down, to write, or hopefully not just to write pretty fluffy random words. I mean, maybe you could, I don't know, but if you sit down to write because you have an idea or a feeling that you're kind of going toward or feeling pulled by and you want to express, the words just kind of fall into place, even though there's an infinite number of them that you could choose. And so I think that idea of trying to just connect with an idea, and then seeing what happens and how you end up connecting with it, is very close to improvisation. And you yourself, or your ego, or that self-editing mind gets out of the way. And then, you read it again, and then you're like, crap, I should redo the whole thing. But in the moment, it's just about going toward that. So
it's kind of like improvisation with a net, though, because you can always go back and tinker.
Yeah.
Where if you're doing it on a stage, you're constantly hurtling forward.
Yeah, I don't do that anymore. So
yeah. No.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Let's see what else we have here. Joe says, 5 or more hours of practice a day. You're kidding, right?
No, I'm not kidding. The most I maybe ever did was 7 or 8. But it was a lot, and it was out of, there's such a confluence of feelings: desperation, determination, love, enjoyment, possibility. It gets better. So no, I'm not kidding.
Yeah, it's amazing. So do you view yourself now primarily as a writer or a musician?
Professionally as a writer, but I really don't feel that I would have anything to write about without having pursued music in this way. And I don't know, I guess I hope it still counts to be a musician to play for, and I really think it does, to still play for enjoyment. There's so many people who I think do have a similar path to mine. They really pursued it with high hopes for a certain outcome for a while, but they're still musicians. Like I do still play when my siblings are home from college. Like it's so fun to have a sight reading party together. I love that.
Mhm.
And I also play, I do a lot of gigs. So I play a lot of weddings and holiday parties and funerals. That's a very interesting and wonderful way to still connect with music. So it's background music, so it's not pressurized. But at the same time, you get to be present for, it's like gig number 7 of the week for you. But for the people who are getting married, like it's their special day. Getting to be there is so fun. And even though you're just in and out really quickly, like, people come up to you at the end, they're all drunk. They're like, that was amazing. Like, thank you so much. It's a great experience. And you really do get the opportunity to meet so many different people, learn about them and connect with them. And also just see how much enjoyment music adds to our lives. That's why we do need it. So, yeah.
Well, we forget that simple function, giving pleasure.
Yes, absolutely.
And that is there. I think we have to wrap up, but I just wanted to say that I think your writing is very musical. Thank
you.
I don't just mean that the sentences all have rhythms that are very compelling, that move you forward. There is a time in the writing, but also theme and variation. I mean, that you have, as I said earlier, this foreground narrative, and then you'll like take a little journey, and then we wonder, how are you going to wind us back? And you do. So we do have that sense of, you're creating time on the page, and it's quite wonderful. And I just have to say, I think that music's loss has been literature's gain.
Thank you. There's no bows to drop in this realm, at least. So
but
I appreciate that.
I do want to thank you for being here tonight, and thanks to the audience, and my encouragement that you pick up this book and take a look at it. It has so many pleasures of so many different kinds. And that whether you do or not, you keep an eye on Natalie Hodges, because she's going to be somebody to watch.
Thank you so much, Michael, for being here and talking with me. And thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah,
it's a privilege.
Really.
And thank you, Michael.
Too. Yes.
Well, thank you both. It was a wonderful talk. And if I recall you saying, Natalie, that you knew that you weren't going to have the talent to be a soloist. But I think in the terms of professional writing, you have more than the talent and the wherewithal to be able to be the equivalent of that as a writer.
Oh, that means so much. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you very much, Michael, for agreeing to do this. And have a wonderful evening, and please buy Uncommon Measure.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.